There we go. Here we go. My name's Todd.
This is Cathy.
Welcome back to another episode of Zen Parenting Radio. This is podcast number 746. Why listen to Zen Parenting Radio? Because you'll feel outstanding. And always remember our motto, which is the best predictor of a child's well-being is a parent's self-understanding. On today's show, we have the wonderful friend of ours, Dr. John Duffy.
The one and only.
One and only.
Hi, guys.
Good to have you back. I don't know how many times this has been. I was texting with John yesterday from my couch, and we were talking about this upcoming conference that he's a big part of this weekend. And we were supposed to have an interview with John in December, and he had some things pop up on his schedule, so did not allow us to have that. I'm like, hey, how about getting one more podcast in before the conference as a vehicle of promotion, but also to promote your book, which is why we're here today. So it's so good to see you. Thank you so much, John, for showing up.
It's good to see your faces. I miss you guys.
Oh, we miss you too. You know how SNL has the people who come on 5 times and then they get a coat?
Yes.
John needs to have a coat.
Yeah, I get some in the closet.
How about some ZPR socks?
Yeah, we'll give him a pair of socks.
Yeah,
that's fine.
I dig that. I'll wear them.
Warm, fuzzy socks. So we're going to be all over the place. John wrote this amazing book called Rescuing Our Sons, and the subtitle is 8 Solutions to Our Crisis of Disaffected Teen Boys. It's a topic that's near and dear to my heart as I lead Men Living, which is an organization that I co-founded way back when. This is the 3rd of John's books. Is that right? 3rd?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
First one was The Available Parent.
Yeah.
Second one was, what was the second one called again?
Parenting the New Teen at the Age of Anxiety.
Yes.
And now you have directed your attention to boys. And at the risk of being a really kind of canned question, why did you direct your attention to the boys instead of the girls?
I can understand. I in writing the book, I anticipated this question. I actually was afraid it was going to be a kind of a challenge, like, hey, this is a time for girls, right? This is a Me Too movement time. This is a breaking glass ceilings time. Why is it some middle-aged white guy writing about boys? I've been worried about this question, to be honest, Todd.
Mm-hmm.
But the truth of the matter is, I noticed in the past few years that the boys I'm working with have flattened out. Their affect is flattened out. They are disengaged, disconnected, unhappy. And the thing that worries me most is they don't seem to be hopeful. Mm-hmm. So the boys and the girls I'm working with are all going through all the things, but the boys don't have light in their eyes. The girls do. They see this path, and the boys don't seem to see a path. And so they are opting out of important elements of their lives, and sometimes all of the important elements of their lives.
Yeah. And I read this book over my Thanksgiving break, and what I liked about it, John, first of all, it's a wonderful book, and everybody should go get it. I also read Richard Reeves' books of Boys and Men, and he's really research-based. And Cathy and I basically tell experiences and anecdotes from our own lives of being parents and everything else. And I feel like you bridge that gap in between research and day-to-day parenting experiences, because
day-to-day therapeutic experience.
Because you have been in a therapeutic office with mostly young men and young women for how long have you been doing this for?
25 years. So
you get 25 years of experience. So you have a historical understanding of what was going on in 95.
95-ish, yep.
Versus 2023. And you've made some shifts. I just love the that it's not like, oh, these are all the stats. This is what I'm seeing. And I don't know if you can call this research-based, but this is experiential based for you. This is what you are seeing. So I just thought it was a wonderful framework, and I want to give Cathy an opportunity to ask whatever she wants, but I also want to just frame out how you structured the book, because I think that's pretty important. You want me to do that first, sweetie?
Yeah, go ahead. Actually, that was going to be my question, is before Todd does that, John, as a writer myself, when I'm looking at somebody else's book, I'm always like, I wonder why or how they got to this, because I know you're like me with, there's so many ideas, you want to throw it all on the wall. Like, how do I say all this in a cohesive way? So how did you, like, was this you and your editor with like 8 things? Did you condense it from 84 things? Or were you like, really, these all fall under similar categories? I just have to, like, how did you come up with it?
So initially I was just writing, you guys might remember for a while, I was writing some pieces for CNN.
Yes.
And I pitched this piece. I said, I'm seeing that boys are not like thriving effectively. And they're like, okay, write a piece. And I wrote it. And my wife, Julie, and I were looking at it, and she very clearly is like, you have a lot more to say than this. Like, this doesn't cover anything. You know, this is so perfunctory and basic, and the stories you're telling me go way, way deeper. So I just started kind of like recording ideas on my phone, and I wrote my publisher and I said, this is just about 3 or 4 months ago. And I said, hey, I got this idea for a book about boys and that they're struggling. And they wrote me back and said, hey, there's a bunch of books about this coming up. This is a crisis. Like, how fast can you get this to us? And so I just started recording, recording into my phone, typing when I could, writing on planes, Cathy. And most of this I wrote in a week. And it wasn't very organized. It was just a bunch of ideas thrown together. And then I had to kind of just organize them. And then my awesome publisher was able to kind of edit in real time so we could get it out onto the market fast.
Got it. Okay, good. Yeah. And what better way, right? I love that medium of being able to like say things out loud and then figure out how to write it. But it's just, you did, I mean, and again, it's just a big compliment that I wanted to give you, because sometimes I really struggle bringing things together. And I told Todd this when your book came out, I'm like, because your book is not simplistic, but it's simple. It's like not, I get very dense in my writing where, you know what I mean? Like where it's like, so it's like layers, and you're like, no, here's the things, here's what I saw. And, you know, I just always, you're a good role model for me.
So I want to jump in. So there's 5 parts to it. And I feel like the first 3 set up the last 2. And I was like, if I'm looking through a table of contents, like, okay, which section would I most want to, if I can only read one part of the book, it would probably be going to parts 4 and 5, but the first 3 set everything up. So part 1 is an emerging realization. Part 2 is the boy problem described, which is great. Part 3, which is probably the most foundational piece, which is gaps. And he talks about the emotional intelligence gap, the loneliness gap, the hopelessness gap, opting out, joylessness, and then even post-pandemic, which is says how current it is. And then part 4, the problems. And I feel like we could do a 20-week podcast series on the problems. And instead we're going to condense in this one small part of this conversation. But porn, body image, yes, boys have body image issues.
Yeah, for sure.
Weed, mass shooter, video games, sexual assault, bullying, and even sports betting, which I'm like, wow, that's interesting. And it totally makes sense.
Oh, for sure.
And then finally, part 5 is the solutions. So that's kind of how it's framed out. And what I did to kind of prepare for this interview, even though I didn't really need to, I know that we can just kind of go as soon as we want to go, and we can go for an hour and not think about it. But I basically just highlighted some pieces that I'm like, oh, wow, this is super powerful to me. And I don't even know which section this is in. And so I'm kind of, sweetie, do you want to start with what you wanted to start with?
Well, let me just say this, like under the problems, Duffy, like all of the problems to me, they culminate in a need to feel alive. Right. And don't get me wrong that I think being a mass shooter is like, there's nothing positive about these things, but there's this, like you said, there's such a flat affect, and all of these things, porn, you know, focusing on weightlifting and bodybuilding and gambling and video games and sexual, you know, conquest. This is a feeling of, I want to feel something. It's like why, you know, in a much smaller version, why people go on a roller coaster or watch a horror movie. They're like, I want to feel. So like, can boys articulate that, or are you helping them do that? Or am I on the right track here? I guess I should ask.
You're 100% on the right track. Boys, the image I had when I was writing about the problems was a boy just screaming out in despair, like wanting to be heard and wanting to know, like, who am I? Who am I supposed to be? And how do I fit into this world now? You know, like, I don't want what I see that men have out there, you know, like so I want something and I'm desperate for it. And so it's going to come out, this anxiety, this angst is going to come out somehow because I can't contain myself, right? This energy is just building up while I'm laying in this bed or on this couch and I'm playing this video game or I'm watching this porn. I want those connections in my life. I just don't know how to get it, you know, like, so all I have are these tools and these are failing me miserably.
Yes. Yes.
So I want to jump in. You start the book out with this. Actually, we were having dinner with Cathy and I and you and Julie, your wife, and you told us about your Tuesdays.
Yeah.
And you opened the book with it. And I think it's just a really kind of sweet way to encapsulate maybe what motivated you to spend as much time and energy on this book. So what happened on your Tuesdays of work?
So every day before work, I get a venti iced coffee from Starbucks. So I see a lot of clients, same number of clients every day. And that is my little insurance policy, that I'm going to make it through the day and be as present and available and alert for my last client as I was for my first. Tuesdays, I noticed I'm draining that thing. Like, I am drinking that whole thing. And sometimes I'm sneaking to the Keurig machine in the lobby and I'm making another little cup of coffee to make it through the day. And what I realized, you guys, is my Wednesdays were completely different. I would hardly drink any coffee all day on Wednesdays. And I'm like, okay, what the fuck? Sorry. But, you know, what's the difference here? And so I dug out my calendar. This honestly happened one Sunday when I'm kind of doing my little bit of paperwork for the month. And I noticed, oh, I see boys and only boys on Tuesdays, not by any deliberation or anything. It just happens to be true. And I see girls and young women on Wednesday. That was the only difference. And then I was thinking, why is it so draining to work with boys? Why do I come home kind of dispirited and exhausted and sometimes a little hopeless myself after a day of working with boys? And so that was the impetus to, like, write the article in the first place and then finally write the book, is that there are these disparities. And the biggest one is just emotional language. The girls have this rich, deep well of emotional language. So we can go through this entire arc of a story in an hour. And it's not like pulling teeth. Like, girls will tell me, like, when the hour's up, okay, we got to go. I'll talk to you next week. You know, like, they handle the whole thing. They know, they're comfortable in an emotional space. And my boys are not comfortable in an emotional space. And it's heartbreaking because they're all such sweet kids who I can tell they're feeling the things and they can't quite get there. They can't quite articulate it. So we spend most of our time just marrying up the language that we're using. And that is draining. That is exhausting for them and dispiriting for them. And I think it is for me as well. So Tuesdays are hard.
Yeah.
Well, maybe I want to put a pin on that because I think what you're talking about is emotional intelligence, and maybe it starts with emotional literacy and then it goes to emotional intelligence. And in my judgment, our daughters are much better equipped to be emotionally intelligent, conditioned and equipped.
Culturally, societally, and also just practice. Yeah.
So where I want to start is what I want to do is just read your words back to you. And it's like a sentence or a few sentences, and then tell me in what context or to expand on it. And I think this one, it's just a sentence that I'm going to read, but it's about what boys are hearing from society about their value. Okay. That's my setup to your quote. And your quote is, do these boys remain on the sidelines? Do they march in support? Should they just shut up? Boys come into my office feeling as if they themselves are the problem. I'm wondering if you can expound on that.
Yeah. Todd, you mentioned a minute ago, you were talking about the difference between, like, a guy who writes from a point of view of research and somebody who writes, and my point of view is what I am hearing from these young people, right? And what I'm hearing from these boys is that set of questions that, you know, ultimately from an identity, like, where do I belong in this world kind of thing. Boys are kind of like, I'm not sure what masculinity is. I'm not sure what role I'm supposed to play culturally right now.
Hmm.
I'm not sure I'm not toxic. You know, I'm not sure I'm not supposed to just shut the hell up and step out of the picture altogether. And a lot of parents are like, I don't think my guy feels that way. But most of these guys do articulate that. When we finally get down to what they really feel and why they're opting out, it's because they're not sure what their place is at all. They're not sure what role they're supposed to play in a family, in their friend group, in society, and going forward into the future. They can't envision what their role is supposed to be. And if you think about how disorienting that is, you know, like really, truly, like, you know, like, okay, I don't know, I can't think of what the Glennon Doyle talks about, the next right thing to do, right? And if you're a 16-year-old boy right now and you're a thoughtful person, which most of them are, you're not sure what the next right thing to do is. And so it might be, I'm just going to sit here and watch porn until something comes to me, something like that feels like a right thing comes to me, because I'm not really getting many cues about what it's supposed to be.
Yeah, you know, I remember, John, like we continue to do this, but like about a year ago, we played a game with our virtual community, Team Zen, and talked about, we said, who are the best male role models right now? And people can come up with people, but they say people that are old, that no boy cares about Lin-Manuel Miranda right now. I shouldn't say no boy. Of course, there are boys and men who care, but it's a little outdated. Even The Rock is a little outdated. Like these people who are, you know, thoughtful and articulate, emotional intelligence and all the... And, you know, it's funny because this was before Travis Kelce became famous for all the reasons, is a few people said Jason and Travis Kelce. And I somewhat agree with that. I think that they have been good role models. But other than them, who do these boys have to look up to? Like, who in the world who do they, I mean, and I know some of the people they look up to are very toxic, but what do you hear from them?
So, you know, part of the problem is that what draws boys in are a lot of podcasts and a lot of like YouTube videos and the podcast, the Rogan podcast,
Rogan, yeah.
You know, the Barstool Sports guys, you know, Dave Portnoy. These guys are fun and funny and interesting and curious, and they're a big draw for most boys. So a lot of boys, for hours a day, these guys sit around and talk forever, and these are the voices that are leading most of our boys, you know, like, so, and to most of our boys, they're by and large positive role models, and 99.7% of the time it kind of feels that way. But you can also feel this undercurrent, like it's so subtle and it shows up just on occasion. It's like, ooh, wait a minute, was that like misogynistic? Was that really toxic? Was that like vitriolic? I don't know. And then these things kind of sneak in and bubble up a little bit more and more. And then there's a guest like, you know, Alex Jones shows up on Rogan's podcast. You're like, what's going on? And our 14-year-olds are listening to this, and we're giving some air to these negative messages. So a lot of the boys I'm working with are looking for those voices that are positive male role models. They're really struggling, honestly, to find them. You know, they're turning to really alpha male-y, old school, toxic masculinity, vitriolic role models, unfortunately, you know, and they feel the dissonance. They feel like that's not who we are. And yet these are the people who are talking at us. These are, you know, this is the thing that everybody's listening to. If I want to be able to hang out with my boys, I got to know something about what these guys are talking about. So that's part of the problem, is they have a little bit of a cultural vacuum. It's not open enough.
I'm scanning through. So Cathy and I had this thing called Team Zen, and I posted like, who are the positive role models out there? And I'm just kind of scanned through them. And these are some of the people that our team said might be in that bucket. Peter Attia. I think most kids don't know who Peter Attia is.
Again, it's too old.
It's too old.
Yeah.
Let's see. Keanu Reeves.
Too old.
Too old.
I'm sorry.
He's not in their orbit.
Steph Curry. Okay. It's not bad.
Not bad.
Steve Kerr.
but still our generation. Like he's a
Yep.
good dad kind of role model.
Ted Lasso.
Ted Lasso.
Ted Lasso is pretty good.
Ted Lasso's pretty good.
I'm trying to see if there's any, and that's it. And it's such a sad, like, it's so much easier for me to come up with the examples of Donald Trump, Jordan Peterson. It's easier to remember the ones who I deem
are harmful.
have more of a harmful impact than the positive ones.
Yeah, and here's the thing, John, like from a understanding human behavior perspective, I get it. Like if boys are feeling that there's a lot of like commentary about how they're doing it wrong or patriarchy is a problem or toxic masculinity, and then you have people you listen to who say, hey, listen, you're good and you need to hold on to that masculinity and you need to speak up for yourself. Like human behavior wise, it makes total sense why boys would be drawn to that, which is something that we talk to our, to our clients, to our team about all the time. Is this is less about saying, how could you listen to those guys? And more about being curious. Like you do an excellent job at this, John. Like your clients are always interested in things you may not be interested in, but you
get interested,
stay curious, correct? Like how do you manage that?
Yeah. So that's why I listen to all these podcasts. Like when a boy tells me he's interested in something, when a kid tells me they're interested in something, I go and chase that down. Like and this is what I want parents to do, because I want parents' voices in the mix all the time, like, so the idea that like, I can't stand he's playing those video games, so I'm not going to have anything to do with it, is such a misguided notion, right? Because it's like, oh, well, your parents weren't into whatever music you were listening to, and how did that work out? Like, so get into what they're into. And usually you will find a thread or a vein that helps you understand, like, and it gives you a set of questions. It opens a discussion of like, all right, walk me through this. Like, what draws you into this particular guy or this game? Like, what do you love about this particular game? And that curiosity will lead you to someplace good, because these kids are amazing. I've said before, I haven't worked with a kid I haven't fallen in love with ever, like not one time, but you have to get into their world to understand like, oh, this is why you present like such an ass, like I get it now, right? That armor is necessary in your world because of X and Y. I get it. I understand. But if you don't go for that depth of understanding, then you'll just judge. And that is just a
disconnector,
right? And what the connection is what our boys need more than anything, man. They're so disconnected. Everything is a screen. Everything is one-dimensional still for them, right? We hear like they're not having sex. They're not dating. Like, I had a girl say to me, I don't know, maybe 2 weeks ago, she's 16 years old, beautiful girl. And she's like, where are the boys? Like, why are they not like calling us? And like, we're awesome and we're fabulous and we're hot. And where are they? They're not, they're not looking toward us at all. What's going on? And she was right. Like the boys are so anxious about connecting in a genuine way and so unsure about how to do it that they opt out and they don't. And you have to understand why. So you don't just judge it and say, just do it, just do the thing. It's not that easy.
It isn't. And it's so funny because I have 3 daughters. So as you know, and you know them well, is that it's funny to hear from their side because now that I have 2 that are adults, 18, 19, 20, the boys come along, but so much later than they did in other generations. Like by the time they're 17, 18, it's like, okay, now we'll go to prom. Like they make it to the last event, but it's like they're so behind. And I don't mean because we failed as parents or because these kids they're just more behind than they used to be. Thus your book. Like this is why we're having this conversation. And one of the things that I wanted to say about these role models is like the thing about listening like you do to the podcast or watching what these kids are watching is you can pull out the gold. Like what I know about, Barstool, because I watch enough, is that Dave Portnoy has Taylor Swift's back. Okay. He adores her. He thinks she's amazing, and he thinks she's amazing, not because she's hot, but because she's talented and she's done this and this and this. So you hear him being able to he says misogynistic things sometimes. I don't love all their content, but to be able to talk to your kid about the difference, like Dave is not perfect and neither are a lot of these guys. And can you hear, because like you said, the boys are smart enough to hear that they feel that dissonance. Like I follow this part, but when they say this, that's how our kids learn how to have critical thinking.
Yes, Cathy, that if I could just like piggyback on that.
Yes.
A lot of boys, and one boy in particular who was very articulate, he said, we don't need to learn the way you guys learn. Like we have the internet. We can figure things out. So you know, like a lot of what happens in school is superfluous and unnecessary and drives us crazy. And that's why we're all taking medication for ADHD, because we're not that interested in what you're teaching us.
Right.
But we're not very good at discernment. And that's what we need to be able to do. Like we need to be able to listen to Dave Portnoy and discern, like, what do we agree with? What don't we agree with? And that can all be part of our lives, you know, that we can and we can seek out other positive male role models and see what we agree with and what we disagree with. And discernment is the missing piece of what, especially boys, but I think all our kids need to learn, right? Is like, you know, okay, how do I pick out and decide what resonates with me? And part of that is what you were talking about, Todd, that emotional intelligence. Being able to read yourself is huge and understand, besides just sad, mad, glad, you know, with some depth, this is how I feel about this thing. And what he just said there, that hits me differently. I don't love that. You know what I mean? Like that little, like, that didn't feel very good. Like, you know, that gut feeling, it needs to be taught to our kids. And then they'll get it. They're so close, you guys. They're right there and hungry for it, right? You know, to your point, Cathy, like they want to live their lives. They want to engage, but they need a few tools before they're ready to jump into the pool.
So there's a few things. One thing you taught me, John, I don't know how many years ago it was, but like, you know, I would be talking to a mom or a dad and like, my 15-year-old son is just so shut down and there's nothing available. I just cannot even start connecting with them. And one thing that you taught me was you just got to find a thread and you just got to find that thread and pull on it, whatever that is. And if it's Kanye or if it's gaming or if it's sports, like, and that's what you're talking about. So I just want to say thank you for that, because I repeat that a lot. Like, just find one thing, because you can always find that one thing. And the fact that you're listening to these podcasts, and I'm guessing some of the parents are not listening to these podcasts, is a shame, because they want you to fix them because their kid goes there every 2 weeks, when in fact they have a much more opportunity for influence than you do. And then the other thing is, I can't skip a chance to ask you about the term toxic masculinity, because it's not a phrase that I'm against using when I'm speaking to groups of people. However, there are people that I respect dearly, like Jackson Katz, and he says that phrase does more damage than it does good. And I just wonder, do you even have a position on whether or not you use that phrase toxic masculinity, and why you hold the position that you do?
I don't love the phrase because of what it suggests, but it is a phrase that boys and young men use a lot, like they think about. And so I can't ignore that phrase, you know, because unfortunately, it kind of encapsulates for them. It pulls together a bunch of pieces of things and suggests, like, you might be this, like this might, all those little things that make you feel a little insecure about yourself, it might all be part of this core thing that you're not willing to recognize about yourself, that you are inherently not good. And that's what a lot of boys are worried about, is they're either not good, or I think more to the point, not helpful and not necessary.
Mm-hmm.
That's the idea I get from a lot of kids, is like, you know, a lot of the kids I work with, the boys in particular, have what I call passive suicidal ideation, which is, I'm not going to do anything, but if I walk out of here and a bus hits me, that's fine. You know what I mean? It's kind of like not this deep value for their lives, and that they have something to add to the culture and they have value, but I don't think I'm important in general. You know what I mean? And I think we have to show them that they are, like that's what every conference, I think I've talked about lighting up for your kids. You got to light up for your kids and let them know that they matter and that they're important. And I say it with a degree of like desperation because they don't know it. They don't.
John, like I want to go back to the feeling aliveness. And that is about yourself, about hope, all these things that you say that boys right now, it seems flat, is that I really think in our, like, what can we do in our families is having a culture of aliveness in our home. And again, that's going to look different, but it's like, do we as parents have things we're hopeful about? Do we have fun? Do we laugh? Do we see in every individual in the family the light that shines from them and the gifts they have? And that sounds cheesy. Let me say that better. Do we recognize everybody's skill sets? Do we pay attention? Do we say, man, when you're at dinner, you are the best because you bring up the greatest, topics? Or it doesn't have to be about perfect grades and you're the, this on the football team. It's about you as a human, because that's the aliveness. Like when we talk about aliveness, sometimes parents go straight for I'm going to put them in a club or a sport, which is fine. That's a whole nother thing. But this is deeper. This is, what you're describing is they don't have a sense of inner worth. And
yes.
So like, how do we do that as a culture, like in our families?
First of all, what I think you said there wasn't cheesy. Actually, I think that's actually exactly the point. And I'm smiling because in the past couple of years, like during and post pandemic, I've done a lot of like parent coaching, like, so literally like working with parents, not always working directly with kids. And I found that is a concept that parents kind of dig and love. And the idea that like, oh, right, we can model, a really fun, energetic, active, alive life. And there's one family I work with, I'm going to be a little cryptic here, but I don't think they'd mind me outing them a little bit. And mom and dad in particular, they came in one time not that long ago, and they said, he said I forgot, my kids are awesome. Like I love and he honestly had, I forgot they weren't just a pain in the ass. Like, but we started playing some games and we would just have some talks. And there's a game that my wife and I and George, my son, and his fiance Lauren play, where the whole game is, think of a person, anybody. It can be a real person, it could be a famous person, it could be somebody we know, anybody. And so it's my way of getting out of playing board games because Lauren loves them and I don't. And then you just ask a bunch of questions until you figure out who it is, and everyone like celebrates, like, oh my God, like that we figured out who it was. And that generates all this discussion. So this family started playing that game and they would just laugh together. And the dad realized, like, oh, these kids have depth that I didn't know they had. And they know about famous people I didn't know they knew about. Like, so he's learning about his kids who he has in this box, right? Of like, kind of like, I just have to like contain them and get them to this certain point and then I'm done, but this is an exercise. This is, and then I can like check the box, right? Like kind of like retirement, like I can call it, instead of like, oh, this is joy. This is a joyful process. These people are amazing and they live with me. Like they're my roommates and we get to hang out. And that changes everything, because that changes a kid's whole demeanor, because mom and dad kind of, not by virtue of some guy telling them light up for your kids, but by virtue of like, I'm hanging out with them, I'm getting to know them in a really organic way. And it's easy to light up for them because I'm realizing the truth of that they're amazing, that they're thoughtful and smart and creative and incredible. And that's one of my favorite things, is like, I forgot my kids didn't suck. Like that is a great moment.
In the second part of your book, The Boy Problem Described, you talk about a young man named Ryan. And Ryan, I think he's a freshman at university, and he takes a gender studies course. And I'm just going to read this paragraph, and then I want you to riff off of it.
Wait, Todd, before you do that, can I say something just because I know we're going to switch gears to something different?
Sure.
Is I just want to go off what John said, and that basically, because I'm thinking of our friend Annie Burnside, who wrote, Soul to Soul Parenting. And again, people use this in many different ways, but I always like to give Annie credit. Is like when you get out of the role of parent and you're like, these kids, I'm having relationships with them. And right now we're talking about teen boys, and I talk about teen girls all the time. Like, they're getting older. You get to have a more peer relationship with them. Yes, you're still the parent. Everyone always jumps on me about that, but you get to have fun. And, on that note, like the thing that Todd and I always do, or I make sure we do, is this is awards season right now, John. I don't know if you know that, but
I'm aware that you're aware too.
I'm very aware. Like, this is Critics' Choice and Golden Globes, and the Oscar nominations are coming out on Wednesday, and, Emmys were in January. And like, that to me is important. That's not important to everybody, but like, I bring my kids in, we have like a competition around it. And just like you said, like my younger daughter, who's still home, when she fills it out, she's like, I'm only doing it from my heart. She's like, I know these people won't win, but I'm doing this from my heart. You get, not that I didn't already know that about her, but they bring their personality to games, to things that you do. So, for Lauren, it's board games. For you, it's like, let's have a conversation. For me, it's like, I bring in competition because then Todd will do it because he needs to compete with everything. So, like, we create it so everybody likes it. So I just wanted to riff off of that because I think we forget that we can be, and this used to be so off limits when John and I first became therapists, but you can be friends with your kids, you guys. You are still their parent, but you can be friendly with your children. Do you remember when everyone would be like, do not be your kid's friend?
Oh, it still happens, doesn't it, Cathy? I mean, like, so I still get that a lot. Like, I'm the parent and I drive the hard line.
Yeah.
And my point is kind of a combination of what we're saying, because I totally agree with you. And the good news of parenting is something I think we forget, is like, if we invest in that way, if we enjoy it and connect in that way, then our parenting works, like that's the emotional bank account thing, where it's like, okay, you're investing and you're suddenly in the black because you're enjoying your time together instead of policing your time together. And so you can read all these books or come to these conferences and something's going to work actually, because you've made that investment. It's like a win-win. It's not one dimensional, but it's not the reason to do it. It's just a good byproduct.
Exactly. Beautiful. Thank you. Good. Okay, Todd, go ahead.
So before we get into the gaps, which is part 3, I just want to read you something that impacted me in part 2. And it's about, I think one of your clients, John, was a freshman at a university, and he took a gender studies course wanting to understand a different person's perspective. And so this is what you wrote. Ryan also told me that in real time, he sensed an undercurrent of sentiment against men in the class. The girls and women in the class were called on most frequently for discussion and questions. He noted a lot of talk about toxic masculinity and the societal problems caused by men seeking to gain power, money, sex, or fame. Ryan actually had some points he wished to make and some questions to ask. He wanted to speak up frequently during the class, but every time he thought about raising his hand, he stopped himself. The risks of being called out, of being accused of not getting it, or of being canceled in real time felt too great for him. Eventually, Ryan, who had again chosen to take his course in order to better understand, dropped the class altogether. To him, the risks outweighed any potential rewards, and he was just too anxious in there to continue. And that's just like so heart-wrenching to me. Because I felt like we were about to create an ally, right? And then he got too scared. And I can look at that through both lenses. One is, okay, the girls are getting called on more frequently, like, welcome to what it's like to be a woman, right?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Our female counterparts swim in that world. So now Ryan is swimming. And I love the fact that Ryan jumped in. And I'm just so sad that he jumped out because it's foreign to him. We're not used to not getting our needs met first. So I just wonder if you have any thoughts about that.
Yeah. First of all, that is he gave me permission to use his name and his story. That story is basically comes from Ryan verbatim. It's kind of like he wanted me to include that because he said, like, I want there to be some cautionary tale to people out there that if we're not because he came into that course an ally, very much an ally, wanting to learn more, wanting to learn, like, be part of the conversation, learn what he could do to be helpful. And that anxiety really did what was profound enough that he stepped away from the class, and he kind of wanted me to send out a clarion call culturally that if we're going to have the conversation and move the ball forward for any group, we all have to have, everyone needs a mic. You know what I mean? Like, everyone has to have a microphone. We can't silence anyone and expect the ships to rise. You know what I mean? Like, because he said, like, if you were a different guy, he would come out of that situation angry. And he would, and then suddenly he would be on this other team, and there would be this division, right? And he thinks a lot of times there is that actually is happening in real time. And so, his point in encouraging me to include that was, let this be a cautionary tale that there is some anxiety about saying the wrong thing. And if we're all walking on needles and pins and being cautious about what we say, some of us aren't going to say anything. And that negativity could be turned inward, as it often is, could be turned outward and make a headline one day, as it often does. So, so it's just the big point is just all voices need to be heard. All voices need to be heard on all the issues.
Well, we have this binary thinking, like, it's either are we lifting up the girls or the boys? And I shared this quote on the podcast last week. A friend of mine said it. I don't know where he heard it, but when one gender wins, both genders lose. And I think that could be really hard for certain, the idea that we're going to focus on boys. If you're a woman or if you're a girl, you're like, we've been focusing on boys since, I don't know, 4000 BC or whenever we started doing that.
In our lifetimes.
And in our lifetimes.
Yeah.
And now all of a sudden we're giving more attention to the boys?
Well,
Go ahead, sweetie.
It's interesting because, like, that's such an interesting story. Like, we could do a class on that story because, like, I'm picturing myself, I teach college kids, and because I teach social work, I have very few guys in my class. It's usually like 3 guys and then like 20 girls. And when I'm talking anything about gender specific, and sometimes I have to say things like, here's the statistic around, boys, tend to only show anger, girls. But then I'll always stop and say, okay, guys, what do you think about that? So they can say, they usually agree, like, the research is not that far off from most people's experience. But to your point, as long as they can share it and not be told who they are, like, I think these are very nuanced things of, it's not so much because I'm picturing the girls in this gender studies class of Ryan's, and they're there to talk about their experience. And if a guy is like, ooh, call on me, they're going to call him a mansplainer. They're going to, or internally, there's like, let us talk about, but it's gender studies. He is a gender as well.
Right.
So this is it's a, I'm just going to throw the word compassion on it. We just have to be able to, first of all, as teachers, make sure we're getting both perspectives. Like, I wish that teacher could, I'm not going to blame the teacher, but it'd be nice to make sure we're going to hear from the guys, we're going to hear from the girls. Like, we got to differentiate a little bit if we're talking about gender, if that's our topic. But we also have to be kind to each other about, I don't even know how to say this, like, because I tend to, Todd lives in a home with all these girls and women, and sometimes we say harsh things, and I have to kind of back up and be like, Todd, this isn't about you, but we still need to share our experience. And sometimes it comes out with some rage.
Yeah.
Does that make sense, John?
It does. And, so Ryan and I, we talked about this because I was starting to write the book at this time. And I think I'm pretty sure I kept the story in, but I'm not sure. I was on a plane writing part of the book, and there was a woman next to me, and I was thinking,
this is in,
was it in there?
And
she's kind of looking over my shoulder, and I kind of am mortified. I'm kind of thinking like, oh, here I am. I'm this white guy, middle-aged white guy, and I'm writing about boys, and she's thinking, and I've got life experience, right? I've got a leg to stand on, and I'm like, she's thinking like, what are you doing, man? This is not, you have the wrong place in the wrong time. And we are on a different topic now. And so like, we worked through the anxiety, and he did agree, like, hey man, my assumptions might've been wrong. Like, I might, if I had spoken up, maybe that would have been the greatest thing that would have happened. Even if the shit hit the fan, that might've been a good thing, So I think part of it is like loosening up everybody's thinking about this a little bit, so that we can talk about gender and gender equality and what that means, and what equality really means, and not make assumptions. Like, I assumed something about this woman next to me. Ryan assumed something about that whole classroom. And, his anxiety probably came from an honest place, and but he is conflicted about tapping out of that, and I think that's a good conflict to have. And it probably would have been a great conflict to bring up in class, right? And that's, I love the idea, Cathy, that you actually turn to the guys, like, and you say, like, what do you think? I think the more we're kind of like, what do you think? And we hear out what people have to say, the better off we're going to be. And it's a weird time to say this and mean it, but the more likely we are to find common ground. And I'm gut checking that as I say it, because I'm thinking, like, politically in the last 7 or 8 years, how difficult a time have I personally had finding common ground with people I thought I loved and respected and understood. And then once it came down to like that 2016 election, I was like, I don't know if I could talk to you anymore, So I kind of get where a division can feel like a permanent thing. We're done talking. But some part of me deep down believes that's not the right way. That's not our way forward.
Yeah, we're wired for survival, and we're also wired for connection. And it's a contradiction, it's a paradox, but they're both true.
And John, I know you saw this because you said something about it on Instagram. I reposted a picture today because 7 years ago today was the Women's March. Yes. And I brought my girls, and my friend Manisha brought her girls, and we were all there. And Amy Guth, she took a picture of us outside of the WGN studio. She saw us walking by with our signs. It was so great.
Amazing moment, by the way. Look at Cathy's Instagram. That's so cool.
It's so cool. And it was such a moment. But what's interesting about that 7 years ago, you just said this, is that when I was going to that, many people were like, I get it. And many people are like, now, why are you doing this? What are you angry about? Nothing has happened yet. What are you upset about? And there was a lot of foreseeing, what has occurred. Like, women knew what was happening, and it opened up all these conversations about race. It opened up all these conversations about gender, because I was going to say, like, one of the things that I learned from talking more about race is the willingness to have a messy conversation, the willingness to make a mistake and repair for it, and to learn and be curious. Like, we have to be willing to, and this is what Ryan's learning. And his story is so great because he learned from that experience. Like, how do I want to do this different next time? And sometimes it's the willingness to say something and you make and I'm doing this in air quotes, a mistake where you piss people off, but you repair it and you say, you know what, now I get it. Now I totally didn't realize how, short-sighted that was, or now I get it. So it's this, I will say, and again, because I'm always boosting women in this way, but we knew what was coming. Like, we knew what, and when I say coming, like so many things, but we lost basic essential human rights in this last couple of years. Like, we knew that, and people told me, Cathy, you're crazy. That's not going to happen. That's not going to happen. And it's gone. Roe v. Wade is overturned. So these are the things that we struggle with as women. Well, I'm not, okay, sorry, this is about boys. I get so sidetracked, but we're all
Cathy,
together.
Yeah. And in fairness, here I am talking over a woman. I'm so sorry.
please, you're Duffy. You don't do that.
But the truth is, this isn't just about boys, right? I mean, the truth is, it's about everybody. Like, this is also about girls. And when I talk about like these boys, like we need them to understand what women are going through in a really honest and sincere and deep way, because it's really hard to understand. Like, when you talk about Roe v. Wade being overturned, I'm thinking literally, I have to be reminded. I had this sinking gut feeling, but I don't think about that all the time.
Right.
I think women do. You know what I mean? Like, and so I think we have to be reminded sometimes about, like, how other people feel. And these boys and young men are going to be fathers and partners and husbands. And, this is about everybody winning. You know what I mean? Like we all, like Todd was saying, like, this is about men and women and boys and girls and everybody in between, like this is everyone.
Well, and who is one of the best beneficiaries of men growing up to be conscious, present, grounded men is women, is everybody. It's not, we're not, if we're conscious and our version of healthy masculinity continues to grow and evolve, of course it's going to help the guys, but it'll help any person who happens to be in partnership with a man, which would include romantic, which would include parenting. So, that's just the deal. So anyways, all right. So part 3, the gaps. These are the gaps: emotional intelligence, loneliness, hopelessness, opting out, joylessness, and post-pandemic. Is it a coincidence that you put emotional intelligence gap first or not?
It is not a coincidence at all. That's the big one. That's the, if we can bridge that gap,
yeah,
most of the rest of the gaps get bridged pretty readily. So no, not a coincidence. That's the big one. It's funny because sometimes I listening to us talking, this feels like a conversation that could have been had 30 years ago. Right. It almost feels outdated. And I think part of my point in writing this book is, in this post-pandemic world, this is not outdated, and we have backslid a little bit where that gap, that emotional intelligence gap, seems more prominent than ever to me. And it's super important because if you've spent 30 seconds studying emotional intelligence, and I think most of us have some feel for that now, without some of that in your life, the idea that you're going to be happy and you're going to thrive and you're going to be successful in whatever that looks like to you, is so unlikely. You might make a bunch of money, you might get married and stay married for a long time, but it won't be satisfying and fulfilling and deep and rich and all the things that we all know we want for our people. And so, no, it's the most important one, Todd, and it's everything. If it was the only part of the book somebody read, I'd be happy.
Well, and I want to jump to the joylessness gap. And in that section, you talk about the Taylor Swift effect. And I'm wondering if you can share your experience, what that means.
Yeah. So I've got an office in the city in Chicago, and Taylor Swift had a concert this one Thursday night, and I was heading into work, and I saw countless. And my office is 2 miles from Soldier Field, where Taylor Swift's concert was. And I saw so many groups of moms and daughters decked out, like and singing in the streets, in the city, and dancing, and just filled with joy together. It felt surreal. It felt like a movie that was absurd, and yet it was really happening, and it was visceral for me. I was Cathy is holding up her phone right now and showing me a picture of her with her daughters doing this very thing. Of course,
joy.
the best case in point ever. And I love that so much. And I remember, I was overjoyed experiencing that. That made my day. And I did not see Taylor Swift on it, but I so wanted to be there. I saw that you guys were there, and I'm like, damn, next time, man. Next time I am, the next era is mine.
Well, she's coming to Indianapolis when, sweetie?
Next year.
2.5 hours away.
Let's go.
Let's do it, John. Not that tickets are available. They're also, right. But anyway, keep going.
So one really quick thing regarding that, and then I want to get into school refusal. The difference between, because if I'm a guy, I'm always being like, yeah, what about when I go to the Bears game and I'm hugging and I'm with my buddies? I experienced the Taylor Swift thing. I went to the show in Denver with my wife and my 3 daughters. My daughters are crying, because the lyrics mean so much. And I don't pretend to understand all of her songwriting ability, even though I think it's as good as anybody has ever done it. I will say that.
yeah.
But there's real vulnerability there. Whereas when I am hugging my buddy because the Bears just scored a touchdown, like what means most to me is vulnerability. And there's not much vulnerability at a sporting event. But at that Taylor Swift concert, it's people are dropping into their hearts. When at a Bears game, the guys still have their armor up. So, anyways, that's my experience.
Yeah, I mean, and you're leading right to the point. That's my experience as well. That we can find shades of the Taylor Swift experience, right? As men, like we can, and it can happen at a sporting event. I'm a big concert goer, and I know that we're collectively, when I'm at a Springsteen show, that we're all experiencing something, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't have that same the depth, right? The depth of emotion, and the joy and the pain, right? Like, you know, that those lyrics speak to you, and collectively everybody's feeling it, and moms are with their daughters, and I know that they're like, I wish an Ed Sheeran or somebody would become that figure for dads and sons, but we don't have that, and we need to embrace something like that. And maybe it's crossed my mind since writing that it wouldn't be the worst thing for dads and sons to go see Taylor Swift. You know what I mean? Like that,
Right.
That would be the thing. Like, you know, my son and I have talked about, like, would we ever go to that? And I'm like, and then we're both like, hell yeah, we go and see Taylor Swift together.
Well, and when I was in Denver,
yeah.
and I almost felt guilty because she acknowledged that the men that were in the crowd are not the men that need to listen to this message. It's the ones who choose not to show up. And I almost felt like, you know, this is not a place for me to feel elevated. Yet Taylor Swift, because she's, you know, a wonderful human being, felt the need to acknowledge, you know, the guys and the dads that were in the crowd.
Well, let me say this, and I'm on Todd's case about this all the time, John. So he's going to be like, I know, Cathy, I know. But women, okay, I'll just speak for myself, my generation, and I think this is true for my daughters too. We grow up looking through men's eyes. Like, we know how to look through men's eyes. I knew how to be Luke Skywalker. I knew how to be Batman. I knew how to be all of these people because all the books, you know, all the history, because that was how I had to learn what it was like to be a human. I had to have that understanding. And what I struggle with is that I don't think men have an understanding of, you can look through a woman's eyes and find yourself in there. And even if you don't find every aspect of yourself, you learn more about a human being, and all because we are all these things. And so that's like, I was just listening to, you know, Dax's podcast, and they have a bunch of different podcasts now on, you know, Dax and Monica do. Monica has a podcast with Liz Plank. You may know her. She writes about men all the time.
Yes.
They have a podcast. It's just the two of them talking about their experience. And Monica said last week that there's a guy who listens to every podcast on their channel. And he said, but the only one I don't listen to is you and Liz. And she's like, well, why? And he's like, because it's about girls. And this is a grown man. And I think what women want to say is, we have learned to look through men's eyes, to look through children's eyes, to look through lots of, and when I say I'm looking through eyes, I'm not having the experience of men or having the experience of a different race, but we're willing to like go there emotionally and you know, and at least try and understand and be curious. And I think that's something boys and men struggle with. Would you agree? I
would. That's such a big, profound notion, Cathy, that you've nailed something really important there. Yeah, I think, you know, I and Todd, I think you to some extent as well. You are surrounded by girls and women, right? And I have the good fortune on my Wednesdays and some other days of the week to really engage with girls and young women about their experiences of the world, and it's so it is so wildly different and so big and vibrant and exciting to kind of get to learn that other point of view. And it makes me sincerely wish for the genders, for the boys and for everybody, that we all had a lot more in common, or we allowed some of the same characteristics to bubble up to the top. Like when I saw the the girls and moms dancing with joy in the streets. Like we guys, me, you know, like dressing up for something. I'm like, I'm not much of a costume guy. And I don't know, you know, like I'm not that great of a dancer, you know, so I don't know. And yet the idea of doing it would probably be friggin' amazing, you know, like, and I think for every guy I know, to allow yourself to hug the people you love unabashedly for a while, you know, and tell them you love them and give them a kiss on the cheek or the forehead, and to cry with people, you know, to cry openly a lot, you know, like to some of these stereotypically feminine qualities. Like if we all exhibited some of that, I just think our lives would be so much deeper and so much richer. And in the end, you know, like, I don't know if I say that directly in the book, but that's part of the experience I want for our boys and our young men and me, like ourselves, you know. Part of this is a message to me, like, hey man, drink in some of what these girls are serving, because it is life, it is big. And missing that viewpoint or silencing that viewpoint is such a mistake. It makes the world so sepia toned.
Well, and I will say, I've been to a million sporting events. I've been to a million concerts. I've never experienced anything close to the Taylor Swift experience. And I'm not the first one that has said that. There's plenty of, you know, macho men that have said that it's indescribable. Like, and you don't even need to know her music. You can walk there we can walk into that stadium without ever having heard a single song and be moved by the experience. And it's not just her and the staging and the dancing, it's the energy of the crowd. It's beyond anything I've ever experienced by far.
Well, and the big takeaway that I hope, or that I think is always trying to be expressed, is if you go into a bookstore, a lot of times it's like, here's the book by Black authors, and here's the books by female authors. And then it's like, and then here's the books by men. You know what I mean? And then it's the same thing with movies. She's a female director. You know, someone was just making the point, talking about sexuality. I think it was Andrew Scott, who's in a good movie this year. He was saying, can we stop saying an actor is openly gay? He's like, oh, what does that mean, openly gay? Like, does that mean I'm willing to, you know, he's like, can we just say he's an actor in this movie instead of the openly gay? And so it's the same idea, is that the norm is as a man's take, and the other takes are a woman's take, and then a person of color's take, or a person who's gay. It's the norm is, that's kind of when we talk about patriarchy, which is, again, can be thrown around sometimes in a way where people don't like that word. But I'm not talking about individuals. I'm talking about the norm is a man's perspective.
The water that we swim in.
Correct. And that's all. It's not men are crap. This is the water. This is the norm. Yeah.
All right. I need to move things along.
Okay.
Because there's a bunch of stuff we haven't gotten to. Page 109. If you
remember that page?
I know it well, Todd.
If you are a parent with a teenage boy who cannot seem to make it to school, follow my lead. It took me a while to learn that this was not a behavioral issue, and that pressing and prodding wasn't going to solve the problem. Instead, I strongly urge you to soften your stance. Ask your son what's stopping him from going to school, why it seems difficult. Let him know that you have total faith in him, and remind him of the resources he has available. What do you think?
So a lot of there's so many elements of our boys' lives right now. I smoke weed in order to get through my day. I take Ritalin or Adderall because my behavior is not tolerable. They feel enfeebled. Boys do not feel strong and competent and resilient and capable. They lead a lot of the times with what their deficits are. I'm really depressed. I'm really anxious. I don't really know what I'm doing. I'm not very smart. I'm not very likable or not well liked. And so tapping out becomes pretty easy. And so school refusal since the pandemic has become about 20% of kids had in the past semester missed 18 or more days of school. So, it's kind of on the table in a way that it wasn't, 5 years ago. And that's one way that this feeling of incapacity rears its head. And if you just if you're just looking at a behavior and your sole focus as a parent is on that behavior, and I'm going to eradicate that behavior from my kid's life, from my boy's life, you're going to play whack-a-mole. Like another behavior will rear its head, and you will make yourself and your kid crazy and create a divide between you, because you're not understanding what drives it. And if you understand the why, it's all about the why. Everything is about, like, why is my kid doing or not doing the thing, you know? And if you can get down to that understanding, then first of all, you get him, and he like, somebody's hearing me, and I can say the hard thing, you know, to my mom or my dad. I can say the hard thing, and I'm not getting rejected, and they're going to help me through that. I'm not alone in this thing. So maybe with this army behind me, I can make it through and have some faith in myself. And you guys might remember, this is my story too. That, you know, like, I started having panic attacks when I was in 8th grade. They were profound. And I thought, my mom effectively told me, don't talk about this again. We will leave this restaurant because you're panicky, but never talk about it again. And so I didn't, and just dealt with it alone. And that's part of the reason I lead with, like, the smile and the grin, because that was what I was told to do. But I suffered for years, and it was brutal. And I see that in the kids I work with. And all it would take is a moment from a parent asking that question, you know, like, so you're not going to school, what's the deal? Like, you know, like, that's, I would be mad about that, but I know that you're not doing it to make me mad. So help me understand, and really go for understanding. If that had happened with me, oh my God, I would have been spared so much pain, honestly.
Totally. That's wonderful.
Like, I just think about that question, you know, because I agree with you. You know, you were saying in your book that it's more boys who have school refusal, and, you know, now for a lot of reasons, which you covered. But when I was working with kids when I was at Children's Memorial or Lurie Children's Hospital, I never get that right. But all of my kids who wouldn't go to school that I had to work on with school refusal were still boys, John. And there weren't as many. And again, I was in a partial setting, partial hospitalization. So of course these were extreme cases, but they were boys. And so I know you just spoke to this. I don't want to make you repeat, but what do you see as those links between boys not wanting to go to school? Because, and let me say this just for everybody, I have a daughter who didn't want to go to school for a while too. So girls have school refusal, like, it's not, sure. But why are there more boys? Like, what are the pieces that people can understand a little better?
I think it does come back to emotional intelligence, and understanding what you're going through. Like, you know, because if boys could understand and articulate, and we're free to, you know what I mean? So if masculinity and the definition of it allowed the vulnerability of, like, I've got this anxiety about going there, or I'm lost in my chemistry class and I can't find my way through it. You know what I mean? Like, there's some underlying, you know, maybe, and there might be a bully, whatever it is, right? You know, that it's okay to say it. And I think for our girls, it's more often than not okay to say the thing.
Yeah.
And for our boys, they're not sure. So they often opt for, I'm not going to say the thing. I'm just going to sit on it and suffer it and grit my way through it, because I think that's my only option. Nobody's going to want to hear, they're going to think I'm making excuses, making something up. And so I'll take the lazy label or the fuck up label or whatever it is, and I'll just move on with my life right here in this house.
Well, and said in less words, asking for help is a weakness according to most men and boys, and asking for help from a girl or woman is not as much or a weakness at all.
Actually, that makes total sense. Thank you for clarifying, because we've already talked about this a million times, but you're right. That connection to school challenge versus the challenge to articulate it, and then the challenge from the person in your home being able to not say man up. Yeah. Instead say, yeah, it's okay that you hurt you know, too, about this. Like there's all this work to be done. As you said, you're doing a lot of parent coaching now, that our kids can learn this. Like, and I know as a therapist with teen kids, you talk to them about it, they get it. They're like, okay, I'm going to do this. But if they go home and the message is, no, you can't do this, then where do they go? And I'm wondering, do you see that boys have a lot of physical issues because they're pressing down their emotions? Like, how does it look? What do boys complain about physically?
Yes. Yeah. So there are boys absolutely have a lot of physical complaints, and they're not moving. So they're very aware of like their bodies, and they feel fragile and sensitive. So that I hear more complaints about headaches, gastrointestinal problems, like all the time. A lot of boys complain about like sexual problems, like not being able to perform sexually, and feeling like physically there's something wrong with me, and not recognizing I might be desensitized because I'm watching pornography too much, or,
and that's a wonderful segue, because I was about to go there. And there's two parts of the book, because, Cathy and I have been talking about porn forever on this podcast.
Do you know what time it is?
Yeah.
Okay. We're going to split this in two.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
I already got some ideas.
All right. Sorry.
We have been here for a minute.
Yeah, it's like we're really getting into
the two pieces that I thought were new to me was this, page 116. Porn does not make young men feel powerful sexually or otherwise over women. I didn't read that well. Porn does not make young men feel powerful sexually or otherwise over women. Quite the contrary. Most young men I've worked with have reported to me that they feel women hold all the power in this regard. This far too often leaves boys resentful of girls and men resentful of women. So say something about that, Doc.
Yep. That is way too often. That is true, that there is this resentment that, girls don't want me sexually. And this sometimes comes from boys who have never approached a girl, or asked her anything. They're just anxious about it. But that idea that girls hold the power, they decide whether something is going to happen. There's going to be some intimate connection. A lot of boys believe that. And I've worked with a lot of men. I've worked with men my age who believe that and resent women for that. I think that's part of the divide between men and women. And one thing I've learned talking to girls and young women is that's not how girls and young women feel. They feel like, hey, we're all for this being like a mutual decision. Make sure we're safe in any given situation. That's a huge thing. And that's not always a given, but then we can decide together. Then we can decide how this is going to go together in a really intimate way. Boys are not yet open enough to hear that messaging, and that causes a big problem. And so all of their sexual experience, I'm overgeneralizing here, but for a lot of boys, a lot of their sexual experience comes just from watching porn.
Yeah.
Okay, so doubling down on the porn conversation, page 117, quote, I am not that turned on by my girlfriend, Duffy. Do you think I might be gay? I find myself testing my physical reaction to attractive men, and I'm worried I may be homosexual or bisexual. And then you talk about HOCD, homosexual obsessive compulsive disorder. I never heard of this. This is brand new to me, so I'm just wondering if you can share a little bit more.
Yeah. So the past 7 or 8 years or so, I have worked with, 15, 20 young men who have this persistent question in their minds about, is there something wrong with me sexually, or am I gay? To be clear, I can't remember one of these guys being upset about the possibility of being gay. They just didn't know, because if you picture like that, the sexual response is on a meter. If you watch enough porn, that meter becomes so poorly calibrated that you just don't know. You don't know where your real turn-ons in the real world are. And so porn becomes kind of your sole source of that. And it has really diminishing returns in terms of excitement or spark or joy or anything like that, because it's one dimensional and it's not real. And you're aware of that in real time. And so a lot of guys question their own sexuality, and you can imagine that has them recoiling. So they're not looking for intimate connecting experiences. They're specifically not engaging in them. And this is more and more guys all the time. It's a pretty significant concern. And the reason I included it is because it's another one of those things I don't think many people have ever heard of. HOCD is not in any manual yet, but I've heard of it often enough and experienced it with guys often enough that I know it is a burgeoning syndrome that we're going to have to address.
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to talk about weed real quick. This is from your book. Emotional expression is, in my experience, the answer to the weed problem, as well as the solution to many of the other maladies. Is that how you pronounce that word?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Our boys suffer. Keep in mind that difficult conversations often precede open emotional expression. So be prepared to have those hard talks, hang in with them, and trust that's the process, not one moment in time. That will bring good results and lasting benefits. I'm asking for some mighty parenting here, but you won't regret it. So your solution to the weed problem is giving and encouraging and giving space to boys to be emotionally expressive.
Yeah. Yeah. It is. And that probably feels like it doesn't make a whole lot of sense, or it's hard to draw the connection between these two things. But weed is so, first of all, it's kind of omnipresent, right? There's so many delivery methods for weed, and it's legal in a lot of places. There's no taboo around it. And it does a pretty decent job for some guys of curbing anxiety a little bit, not to get out there and thrive. It's not a motivating drug, but it flattens things out so you can make it through the day, and really, like most of the guys I work with who smoke a lot of weed or vape a lot of weed, they're just making it through the day. And emotionally, they're flat. And that's the goal. The goal of smoking is not to feel anything. And it's kind of like one guy said, it's kind of like declaring yourself dead until you have a reason to live. And so I'm just going to check out, and hopefully a day will come where I am stimulated by something in the world enough where I'm willing to step away from this way of life. Because weed, for a lot of young men and teenage boys, is a way of life. It is literally what gets their time to pass. Nothing's happening. They're well aware that nothing's happening. It's joyless, and it's emotionless, and it's flat, but it's just a way to keep the heart beating in case something good happens. So if you engage with them, then something good starts to happen pretty quickly, because they start to feel something, right? Especially if you allow that, if you encourage that and allow that, and you share how you're feeling. Even if you share, not long ago, I witnessed a father and a son talking about the son's weed intake, and the dad started bawling and talking about how much he missed him. And it was this beautiful, painful moment, but you could see something change in this kid, where he was like, okay, that's all I needed. That's all I was waiting for, is somebody to let me know they see me and that I matter to them. And okay, I'm going to take a toe out of this box and see how it feels out there. But weed is just, it's a fear reducing drug. And that's really all it does for the vast majority of people who are smoking a lot of it. And there's a lot of young guys smoking a lot of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love that you say it's omnipresent, because it's totally true. This generation views weed through such a different lens. It's everywhere. Like you said, you can buy it legally, and, people have access to it so easily. And it's interesting because, a while back, 30 minutes ago in this conversation, when you were talking about, like, Todd, you're talking about being at a football game, or you guys were talking about, cheering and like hugging and, John, you were saying, or Todd, you were saying it's not that vulnerable. And I'm like, until you add alcohol, and then men all of a sudden can, and women can do this too, the inhibition inhibitions go down. You start to say, I love you, man. You might kiss him on the cheek. You might hold him longer. You might say, you're my best friend. So alcohol like allows people, non-gender specific, to speak, and weed keeps us from speaking. It feels like it decreases our vulnerability in a different way, keeps us more quiet. And I know that, sometimes weed can make you say crazy things too,
Sure.
where you start to go to recesses of your brain where you're like, wow, I'm seeing things totally. So I'm not saying it's always that way, but it's interesting how we self-medicate to get our needs met. And this information, alcohol and weed, tells us what we want. I want to be able to say who I am. I want to be able to speak up and connect. And I also want to be accepted for all these feelings.
Yeah, no, and alcohol is a great counterpoint, right? Because it's like this great disinhibitor, and sometimes like this real part of us that we want to show comes out.
Totally.
And weed just brings everything down to this flatness. And weed is to me such a it's kind of a depressing phenomenon that it's so omnipresent. The occasional use of it kind of cracks me up. Like if somebody is actually getting high, like I am a teetotaler by nature, but I can be like, if I'm with somebody who's high, I can like find this like I can join them in that space. But if it's just to be flat, it's just so heartbreaking. And you can see it, like, it shows up on the couch, and literally like it shows up physically, where if I'm working with I can tell walking in the door if a boy uses weed a lot, because it literally, it's like there's no muscle mass, there's no bone structure. He's just like on the couch, but kind of just flopped, just like somebody dropped him there.
And we're probably finishing up here, but I want to give you props for something, Duffy. Is you were one of the first people in this clinical space and in this media space to really talk about Juuls and, Juul, I think it's called. Maybe I shouldn't put an S on it. That vaping and the nicotine that kids were consuming, you were seeing from your clients, was really a problem. And I feel like you were one of the first people to really be like, no, it needs to be gone. This is not something we need to just talk to our kids about. It needs to go away. And Juul really, I don't know that Juul is gone, but I feel like, do you feel like that shifted at all, the nicotine space, or is it just as bad?
It's way better.
Juul
is by and large gone. If you have a Juul, you are not cool.
Cool.
There's still like there's Zen, like there's there's still like pouches and things like that. So there's still there's still a little bit of a gateway drug thing between weed and nicotine, but it's not, it didn't go where I was afraid it was going to go. So like, to your point, like, that, I remember reading like a year or two ago, there was a story in the New York Times about Juul, and I'm like, this is so late for this to be showing up now. Is totally absurd. But luckily it was on the back end, I think, of that trend. And I think I hope we're through that space. I don't think we're through the space with vaping weed, but vaping nicotine and the nicotine craze, I think people realize the limited utility of that.
Well, and that's kind of, everybody listening here probably already knows you, but it gives you a reason why you need to buy John's book, because he's always he's cutting edge about what's going on with our boys. So in 2 years, you're going to read an article in the New York Times about, is weed a problem for our boys? And John's like, yeah, I could have told you this a long time ago. So we are, he's on the front lines. And so that's why I wanted to bring that up, because I just remember you being so adamant. It gave me a better foundation because I wasn't seeing it as much with girls. I know girls were doing it, don't get me wrong, but yours was so, you're like, dude, they're all doing it.
So the problems that we didn't get to, I just want to say them out loud: the mass shooter problem, the video game problem, the sexual assault problem, the bully problem, and the sports betting problem. So we have to cut this somewhere, so I feel like we have to cut it here. Anything that you want to highlight amongst any of those problems, John? I know it's a big ask because, it's a good chunk of your book, but anything specific?
Yeah, I mean, all of it's kind of a piece, right? All of it is boys and how their pain shows up. The one that probably jumps out at me that I'd like to comment on is the school shooter, the mass shooter problem, right? Because this is something now on average in a school, on any given school day in the US, there is a mass shooting. Like, and I think that's 3 or more people being shot, right? With a gun. I mean, this is the craziest thing to be able to say. And so I think there's one recorded case of a female mass shooter. Other than that, it's been all boys and young men. And what I want to say about that is the vast majority of the time, the angst that these guys that we're talking about, that these guys feel, is turned inward with that kind of self-loathing, but on occasion it's turned outward, right? And that's where a headline is made. And not kids are terrified of school shooters, but what I want to say is I want us to think upstream a little bit. And if we can imagine that we instill some degree of emotional intelligence and understanding and a soft place to land and some gentleness in the lives of these boys, right? And I know asking for empathy for somebody who commits something, who does something so frigging wretched and awful is an absurdity. But going forward, if we want to stem the tide of this, we have to recognize, like, yes, it's the guns. I friggin' hate the guns, and I shouldn't be elected to office because I would say, okay, your Second Amendment repealed. We're going for your guns. Right. That said, I think our profession, my profession, is too adamant in saying it's not about emotional pain, but there is emotional pain there. Like there is, and I think we're missing something if we don't recognize that. And if we need any other reason to look at these boys and say, oh, let's intervene and ease their pain and give them voice and teach them to express themselves in good, positive, appropriate ways emotionally, I think we stem the tide. I think that we don't see school shootings every day. It might not happen next year or the year after that, but at some point, I think we can beat this thing. But I think it takes more an effort from more than one angle.
For sure.
Oh, that's I appreciate that optimism. I do. And I'm with you. I think it's, to your point, I think we're just way too binary in this country as far as it's not that, it's this, and it's all combined. I'm totally with you about, actually at our conference next weekend, one of our, sponsors is Mom's Demand. Like that's a huge part of Todd and my life, right? Like
love them. Yes.
I love them. And at the same time, the other part of the conference is emotional intelligence for all genders. So we don't just do one, we do it all. And everybody wants the same outcome. That's where we're all on the same page. We don't disagree on this. I don't care political affiliation. Everybody wants the same outcome, which is not to have this violence occur.
Yeah.
Part 5, the solutions. I'm just going to read them and you comment.
So you got to let Duffy go.
He said he's got all afternoon.
I know, but we're like it's.
Well, let's touch on it.
Okay.
Let's touch on it.
Okay, go ahead, Todd.
The value of work, the value of movement, physical touch, friendships, the usefulness of therapy, and calling on all dads. Which of those would you like to make any comments on?
I'm gonna combine a couple. So let me see if I can do a hat trick here. I'm gonna the message to all dads, physical touch, and some emotional intelligence built in. A lot of boys tell me that they never touch anybody and nobody ever touches them. And I always find that so striking because I always think about those studies done with like babies, newborns, right? Where, it's like, okay, touch is literally like necessary for life, but like it's also like the way we thrive, and so much is delivered in that way. There's a story that I will probably tell on a stage in front of you guys next week. My dad was he was a flawed parent in a lot of ways. He didn't have any patience. He was not emotionally available. He was out at AA meetings or away at work most of the time. But every day, every single day that I can remember until the day he died, he kissed me on my forehead. Every single day. And that was enough. Like that's all I needed to know. Like, okay, somehow, like, I don't really know this man very well, but I know he loves me and I know we're good. Somehow I fundamentally, inherently know that. And to have a boy tell me like, yeah, I don't remember the last time I touched anybody. And so there's this intimacy gap, but also like the meaning behind touch, right? You know, like it's such a vital part of our lives, and that our guys are missing that, and they're not getting that from their dads specifically, right? Like in the idea of physical affection between a father and son, like the moms and daughters I saw dancing together in the streets, right? You know, like all I'm asking for from dads is like, just give your kid a hug, just give him surprise him with a hug or a kiss on the forehead, or just a moment, right? Just rub their hair, you know, like, and surprise them. That I sometimes believe like maybe that's all we need. Like that, if nothing else is available to us, if our well of our own emotional intelligence is tapped out, or we're just wiped out and exhausted from our own lives, just show a little affection, get a little back, and your kid will know like, okay, something's okay here in this world. Like, so there's something okay, and I've got somebody I can rely on when it's all down. Like, nobody said it, and maybe nobody has to, because I just know it. I just, like, fundamentally, like with me and my dad, I know if it hit the fan, we're good. He'd be there for me.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so beautiful. You know, something my girls pointed out to me years ago was the man hug. How when men come in and then they grab hands and then they hug and they keep a hand between them and the guy, like they're covering their hearts. I'm sorry to get, you know, into the physicality of it, but there's like, I'm going to hug you, but I'm going to keep my heart separate. And even if it's not the intention, I appreciate. Now, if
it is the intention. We got to protect ourselves.
It is, but maybe it's unconscious intention is what I mean.
For sure.
Like, they're not like, I'm going to protect. But if you're doing that, that's good. Like, I'm not saying stop doing that, but maybe move your hands.
Have a real hug.
And hug in a way where it feels kind of vulnerable and sappy, because again, sometimes we're so like, ooh, the sappiness, you know, as all kids say, as you know, Duffy, awk, you know, they're like, oh my God, it's so awk. But you know,
right.
Awk is like, sometimes we're getting to the core of, we're touching a place that's like new and uncomfortable, and it's not always bad. Even if that's sometimes what we remember, you know? And so, you know, again, I'm just pointing that out because sometimes when boys and men do hug, there's still such protection. Like, so, it's a man hug.
I think I have a way to wrap this up in a beautiful way.
Good.
So I was talking to my son last night. George stopped by, and he's like, well, what are you doing? And I said, oh, I'm getting ready for the Zen Parenting Conference. That's next week. He goes, man, I remember when I came to that. And I asked him, like, you know, what do you remember? And I thought, you know, you remember Dad's talk, you know, like
how great your dad was.
Said, I remember meeting Todd because I went to shake his hand and he just hugged me, and I was just like hugging him, and we hugged for I felt like I'd known that guy for a long time. And I remember that moment too, because I was like choked up. It was this beautiful moment where these two men that I love like are finally meeting, and they're like close, like right away. And it was just beautiful. And we just need so much more of that.
Well, and I don't remember.
I'm grateful to you for hugging him, Todd. That meant a lot.
I guess, I don't know how to say this without sounding like a jerk or boastful, but I don't remember that, but it makes sense. George is somebody that I would hug because I know that you love this man, and if you love him, then he's on my team. So, but the difference is, what I realize mostly between guys is we all want the same thing. We want the physical touch, but we're too scared to initiate. And I got sick of being scared about a decade ago. So now I initiate, and about 1 out of 10 times somebody's like, dude, why are you doing this? But the other 9 times it is embraced. Like, oh, we can do this. Like, everybody's like, oh, we could do this. And my invitation for any men out there is initiate, put yourself out there and strike up a vulnerable conversation. Talk about how life isn't that great right now. Talk about how you're struggling right now as a parent or as a partner. Give somebody a long extended hug. There's some men in my life that give these like long 12-second hugs. And in the beginning, I know them well enough to know that this is the type of hug I'm going to get from this guy, whereas mine are usually just a few seconds and then I break. But there's men that just are really good at hugging. And I tell them, I'm like, you're such a good hugger. And I think that I'm probably an exception. There's probably most guys out there that are 51 years old don't have all these other random friends who are really good at hugging. Like it's totally—
I think you're right. I think that's an anomaly.
Yeah.
I remember my brother's funeral. My brother Tom died, 20 some years ago, and my friend Mark. Mark is a great big black man, and my family is walking out of this chapel, and it is the saddest time of my life, and a couple people say things, and it's nice to hear have a moment with some people. And Mark he was standing there with his arms open, and he just pulled me in, and he did not let me go until I fell apart. Like and I did. It was and we're both like literally bouncing, crying, and it was. I needed it so bad. You know what I mean? I needed that. I needed that release. I hadn't had it for the whole week since he had died. And yeah, there's something amazing in that.
That's beautiful. All right. The name of John's book is Rescuing Our Sons, 8 Solutions to Our Crisis of Disaffected Teen Boys. Came out a month or two ago. He's going to be speaking on stage on Saturday at the Zen Parenting Conference. Hopefully you bought your tickets. If you haven't, buy them because we do still have some tickets left. Are you going to be there on Friday too, John?
Hell yes.
Nice. That's what I was hoping you'd say.
John's in for the whole thing. He's our team.
Oh yeah, I'm not missing the moment of it.
Yes.
Sweetie.
And anybody listening, you got to come. You've got to come. Like, I want to pitch the conference for a second because it is the greatest thing. If you haven't been to this weekend, you have got to protect time to come because I don't know how Todd and Cathy talk about this week to week, but it's a great way to sharpen your parenting toolbox. It is a great way to re-energize yourself as a parent. It also is a joyful, emotionally connecting, beautiful event where you will meet friends that you will have for the rest of your life. It's an important thing to attend. Please come and meet us next weekend.
Awesome.
Oh, thank you, John. And we've used the word joylessness in this conversation a lot because that's part of what boys feel is, what do I have to look forward to? And that's kind of the goal. I mean, of your work, John, of the podcast, of the conference, like there is so much joy. Like it's there. It's around
Yes, right.
all the time. We just have to like see it. That's the thing is sometimes with boys, we don't need to give them something to be joyful about. They've already got it inside of them. We just have to point to it and say it's okay. And it's the same with parents. Like sometimes people leave the weekend and they're like, oh yeah, like it's not like you have to deconstruct yourself and become a new person. You just have to remember you're kind of funny already. And you need to know what your kid needs. And you don't have to be in this role of parent. You get to be you and your kid will respond to that. And so I thank you for saying all those nice things.
See you on Friday.
Yay.
And then we'll catch everybody else on Zen Parenting next week.
We love you, John.
Conference wrap up.
Love you guys.
Keep trucking. Bye.
Bye.
All right.
John, that was so long. Thank you so much.
Oh,